Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannan. Today I'm going to do a video on a delicious chocolate chip recipe called Chips of the Gods. These chocolate chips are so good that they're even worthy of the gods. Now this is a very typical chocolate chip recipe, but there's one secret about it that you have to understand in order to make chips of the gods. If you don't do this thing right, you'll just get ordinary chocolate chip cookies, which are good in and of themselves, but they're not chips of the gods. So I'll let you know what that secret is when we come to it. So what's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is you preheat the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, the second step is sift together 2 1/4 cups of flour, any sort of flour, regular flour works, 1 teaspoon baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon salt. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I've taken 1 cup of flour, put it in my sifter. Taken a 2nd cup of flour, put it in my sifter. And now I have a 1/4 cup of flour. I'm adding that in. Now I'm going to add a teaspoon of baking soda. Baking soda is your leavening agent, so it's important. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Here's some salt, 1/2 teaspoon. Now I'm going to sift this into a small separate bowl. So I have my sifted dry ingredients. Now I'm just going to put this aside for now. And then we're going to start working on the wet ingredients. So what you need is you need a mixer. I use a KitchenAid, which is a great mixer. And the next step is cream 1 cup of butter, a 1/2 cup of white sugar, granular sugar, and 3/4 cup of brown sugar. Now, here's the secret to the chips of the gods. Cream the butter and the sugar until light and fluffy. Now, what does light and fluffy mean? Light and fluffy means that it has a whipped cream consistency, which means you got to whisk it at high speed in the mixer for about 15 minutes. That's the key to the chips of the gods. You have to cream the butter and the sugar till it's light and fluffy, which is like the consistency of whipped cream. And it takes a long time for it to get to that point. And I will show you how the stages advances in that creaming. So I have the mixer over here, and I'll show you the mixer. So what we want to do is we want to attach a whisk to the mixer. Now this calls for 2 cups of butter. So I've got 2 cups of unsalted Irish butter here. It might help that this is room temperature because since you're trying to cream it, if it's not cold, it'll cream faster. So take that take two sticks of butter. That's equal to 1 cup of butter. Now what I like to do is just mix that up a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to add the sugars. So first I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of white sugar. This is a 1/4 cup measure, so I just put in 2 of these. 1, 2. And then I need 3/4 of a cup of brown sugar. So here's some dark brown sugar. And I'm just going to put 3 of these 1/4 cups in there. Now, brown sugar can get packed because it has molasses in it. So you pack it down so it's even. There's 1. 2. Also has a nice aroma of molasses to it. 3. Okay. Now we're going to put this at high speed for 15 minutes. About 15 minutes. If anything shoots out, just put it right back in. All right, so I'm going to start the timer. So I got a timer going for 15 minutes. And what you want to do while this is going is periodically check it and scrape the sides of the butter and the sugar mixture off the side. Be careful not to get your spatula jammed in the whisk, because then you'll have a real problem. But you jam it, you scrape the sides, and you sort of push it back towards the middle. That way you get all of the sugar and the butter incorporated in the same mixture. And basically this goes for about 15 minutes until it's at the right consistency. Now, that dark brown sugar gives this mixture a very dark color. But you will find that after 15 minutes, this really lightens up, and it almost looks white. So it's sort of a light tan, almost a whipped cream consistency. Looks very different than when you initially start the creaming process. That's the key to these cookies. You have to do this part right. I'm just sort of rubbing the side of the spatula against the whisk to kind of scrape the excess off the spatula, because I want everything incorporated in there. A lot of people, when they make chocolate chip cookies, they'll stop creaming in about a minute or two, as soon as it's mixed together. You can't get a light and fluffy consistency if you do that. What happens is you get a chocolate chip cookie that gets very flat and very crunchy, and it's a good chocolate chip cookie, but it's not chips of the gods. So basically, this intense creaming procedure gives a lot of substance to the cookie. So it doesn't just collapse into a flat, crunchy cookie. It has a lot of substance to it. It holds up real well. And that gives you a completely different sort of chocolate chip cookie, a better one. Now you can see it's already starting to lighten up some. You can see the color of it. It's lighter than it was before, but it's going to get lighter even still. You can't shortchange this process. It has to be the right consistency or this recipe won't work. And it takes about 15 minutes of high-speed whisking to get there. Doesn't take 10 minutes, doesn't take 5 minutes. It takes about 15. The colder your butter was when you first put it in, the longer it'll take for it to get to the right consistency. I put in pretty close to room temperature butter, so it might not take the full 15 minutes because the butter wasn't as cold. But we'll wait and see. While we're waiting for this to mix up, you can get your other equipment ready, like your baking sheet. Maybe wash off some of the dirty utensils and cups that you used. Put your flour and sugar away. But you gotta wait the 15 minutes. It's getting lighter and lighter. Well, we have about 8 more minutes left of this. And I scrape it. I use the spatula backwards in order to scrape the sides, because I don't want it getting jammed in that moving whisk. I mean, you really almost have to have a standing mixer in order to make chips of the gods, because you're not going to stand over a bowl for 15 minutes with a hand mixer doing this.
The KitchenAid standing mixer is probably the best kitchen appliance you could ever invest in. So I strongly recommend it. See how it's getting lighter and fluffier? Not quite there yet. Again, it's got to be sort of like whipped cream. Not quite as light as whipped cream, but very, very light and fluffy. Skip this step, and you don't have chips of the gods. You have chips for mere mortals. And why eat those when you're going to have chips for the gods? Now, when this is done mixing, we're going to add an egg and vanilla. And then we're going to mix that together. We're going to whisk it together. And then after that, we're going to add our dry ingredients. All right, so it's been 10 minutes. We got 5 more minutes of this. You can see how it's really getting light and fluffy now. Still a little bit of heft to it, a little thickness. It'll get lighter still and fluffier, but it's getting there. And you know, you can always test it if you want. Yeah, that's pretty fluffy right now. Another 5 minutes to do it. Now, you will find that no chocolate chip recipe tells you to cream the butter and the sugar together for 15 minutes with a whisk at high speed. So this is a secret that you won't find anywhere else. Okay, we got about 2 minutes left. It's starting to look like it's almost breaking down. And that's what you want. And you can see that very, very light and fluffy. We have about less than a minute left, so we're really getting there now. We got about 30 seconds left. Okay, the minute's up. So that was 15 minutes. And you can see the consistency of that in there. See how light it is now? See how light and fluffy it is? See how it kind of broke down some? It's almost like a hummus, really, but it's much lighter. It doesn't weigh as much as a hummus. Almost like a wallpaper paste, really. Very light. Very, very light. All right. So now what we want to do is we want to add an egg. Just plop that egg in there. And we want to put in 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. 1, 2. Now we'll just mix this together. It doesn't have to be any length of time. You just want it mixed together. Make sure you don't see any more egg, raw egg, or vanilla. Want it all together. All right, that's looking pretty good. So we'll take this whisk attachment off and get the excess off the whisk and back into the bowl. And then we'll just put this to the side to be cleaned up later. Of course, if you want to, you can always lick this thing. Okay, so now I'm gonna scrape the liquid part from the sides of the bowl. Get it sort of put in the middle. Get it all in there. So step 4 was to add 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract and 1 egg and then beat well. Step 5 is add dry ingredients to creamed mixture. So I'm going to add a mixture attachment, and then I'm going to add the flour in here and mix it all together, and you'll see that it forms a dough, and it does it pretty quickly. I'll put maybe half of the dry ingredients in first so that it doesn't get kicked up all over the place, and start it off slow so again it stays in the bowl and doesn't shoot up in your face. You can periodically turn it on and off just to make sure the flour doesn't get out of control. Okay, let's put the rest in. Whoa, see, that's exactly what you're not supposed to do. You want to keep it all in the bowl. Okay, at this point we have a nice dough has formed. So the next step is to add 2 cups or 12 ounces of chocolate chips and mix well. They can be any chocolate chips you like. So it doesn't matter what one you use. Just put in 2 cups or approximately 12 ounces. So here's 1 cup. There's the second cup. And again, just mix this slowly so it doesn't shoot up all over the place. Okay, it doesn't take that long, 15, 30 seconds. You've got your dough with your chocolate chips in it. Scrape the excess dough off the attachment, put it in the bowl. Take this off, give it to your kids to lick. Delicious. Take this off, bring it over to your workstation. So you can see we have a nice chocolate chip cookie dough. You can taste it, it's delicious. And now we're going to put it on our pan, our baking pan. So the next step is roll about a teaspoon of dough into a ball. Place about 2 inches apart on your baking pan. Squash it with a fork. And that's important because these chocolate chip cookies are so thick that if you don't squash it down, it's not going to fall in the oven itself. So you got to squash it down with a fork. Not terribly squashed down, but you're going to have to squash it down some. And then bake for 8 to 10 minutes. So I'll show you how to do that. So you get yourself a baking sheet. This is Teflon. And I'll show you how to do it. So you get about a tablespoon of dough. It's roughly about that much. You can make them bigger or smaller, however you want. And you palm it, and you turn it into a ball. And then you put it on your baking sheet, like that. And you keep making rows and rows and rows until you fill the baking sheet up. In fact, you don't actually have to have a tablespoon measure if you can just eyeball it. That works just as well. Sort of like you're making Swedish meatballs, really. Depends on how big you want them. This is a nice soft cookie dough. It doesn't stick to my hands, which is nice. Now, of course, I washed my hands before I did this. You don't want to poison your guests. And this makes about, I would say, 2 dozen cookies. This whole recipe. And they probably only last a day because everybody's going to love them and eat them. Okay, so there you go. There's about a dozen dough balls on a baking sheet. Then you want to press these down with a fork. So just press it down like this. You don't have to, make it paper thin. Just press it down. Again, if you don't press it down, it won't fall in the oven, and you'll end up cooking a cookie ball essentially, and it won't cook evenly. The center will be raw, so you do have to press it down some, just like that. Then you take this and you put it in the middle rack at the oven. The oven should be preheated at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and you cook it for about 8 to 10 minutes. After 8 to 10 minutes, take it out of the oven, put this somewhere safe, let it sit for 5 minutes. Once it's done sitting for 5 minutes, these cookies will be gelled enough so that you can risk picking them up with a spatula without them falling apart. So then you pick them up with a spatula and you put them on a cooling rack, and you let them sit there for about 15 minutes. And in about 20 minutes, you'll have deliciously warm chips of the gods. Now, once they're done, they look like this. Now, these chips of the gods are very different than a normal chocolate chip cookie. First off, they're not crunchy. They're not super flat. They're only as flat as you made them when you squashed them with your fork. You can see the fork imprint in there. They're very substantial cookies. When my oldest son was a toddler, he was hungry, and I gave him one of these. And it only took one. And he ate it, and he passed out. And he slept in his high chair for 2 hours. These are very substantial cookies, and you eat one or two. Otherwise, you're going to be feeling it. These are they're delicious. They're substantial. They're a meal in and of themselves, unlike a typical chocolate chip cookie. And you make them, and you'll find out how much better these really are than your typical chocolate chip cookie. Mm. This is a completely different type of chocolate chip cookie. It's very substantial, very filling. There's a lot of girth to it. It's delicious. It's soft. Um, I can't say enough good things about this type of chocolate chip cookie. People love it. But you can't eat too many of them because you'll pass out. All right, well, I hope you learned something, and make chips of the gods for yourselves. You'll find out how great a chocolate chip cookie can really be. All right, take care, everybody.